Okay, I thought we'd mix it up a little bit today and come outside for a quick introduction to organic molecules. And I got my dog Grift here to help me out with this. So, we're on page 16, and we're going to spend the next 2.5 weeks or so covering what you see here. This is the intro to that, so make sure that this is clear and filled out thoroughly. We're going to be talking about things like proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, nucleic acids. All of these are examples of large, fairly complicated organic molecules. So to make sense out of this, let's first define what we mean when we say organic molecules. Organic molecules are called organic because they always contain the atoms carbon and hydrogen. They may contain others, but they absolutely have to contain at least one carbon atom, at least one hydrogen atom to be called organic. And lots of molecules that are important to biology, and many that aren't important to biology, are considered organic. So we're using the word organic in a very different way than when it's used, say, to mean USDA organic or organically grown. That means something totally different. So, which we'll get to eventually, but not today. So what I want to do for today is just fill in part of this table, and then as we work through this in the next few weeks, we'll fill out the rest of it. So first, let's list the 4 major categories of organic molecules that we're going to be covering. In no special order, I just put them in the order here because it's the order I put them in the lecture outline book. We have proteins, we have lipids, we have carbohydrates, I guess I need to make that box a little bigger, and we have nucleic acids. So let's talk a little bit about each of these as an introduction, and then we'll get into each one in great detail, as I said, over the next couple of weeks. First of all, proteins. All of these probably are familiar, at least these first 3 are familiar, because just look at your food label, your nutrition label on packaged food. It tells you how much protein, how much lipid. Well, the fats are a type of lipid, so you'll see fat content. You'll see carbohydrates, which include things like sugars. So these terms may not be unfamiliar to you, but we're going to get kind of into the chemistry and biochemistry of them. But first, for today, we just want to know what they're made of. We just spent a couple of weeks talking about the periodic table and elements and atoms and bonds and all kinds of good stuff like that. So if I wanted to build a protein, which elements do I need? Which types of atoms do I need? Well, I'm definitely going to need carbon and hydrogen because, well, look up here. Proteins are organic molecules, so organic molecules always contain carbon and hydrogen, so that must be true here. But I'm also going to need some oxygen atoms, some nitrogen atoms, and some sulfur atoms. So I just put the chemical symbols from the periodic table of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and sulfur. All of those are going to be needed. Why? We're going to see why when we start covering proteins in some detail in the next couple of videos. Lipids. Lipids include things like fats, but include other molecules as well. So the term lipid and fat are not really interchangeable, but they're related to each other. Lipid is a broader category, and lipids are important to living things as well. And again, because they're organic, you expect that you're going to see carbon and hydrogen atoms in a lipid. You'll also find oxygen atoms. Again, there may be other atoms there as well, but they have to have these two, and they also happen to have oxygens. Carbohydrates. They're going to have carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens as well. But the way they're put together here is different than the way they're put together there, which is one of the things that makes carbohydrates different than lipids. We're going to have to break that down and say, well, if they have the same building blocks, how is it that they are different kinds of molecules? We're going to talk about that. By the way, if you look at the word carbohydrate, it tells you what it's made of. Carbo, carbon, HYDR, that's hydrogen, and if a word ends in ate, it means it's got oxygen in it. That's just a chemistry thing. So carbohydrate literally is referring to carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Anyway, nucleic acids, these are things like DNA and RNA. We actually don't spend very much time talking about them this semester because you spend a lot of time talking about them in Bio 106. But for completeness of this table, we have to at least mention them. And again, they're organic molecules, so expect to see carbon and hydrogen atoms in there. You're also going to expect to see oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus atoms in there. And when we talk a little bit about them in a bit, where you're going to see where the phosphorus comes into play. So there's the atoms that you need to build each of these large, complicated molecules. But I've got this other column here. I've talked about molecular building blocks. These are big, complicated molecules. You don't just take a bunch of atoms and slap them together and have something like a protein. Instead, you take these atoms, put them together and make small molecules, building blocks, if you will, and then put those together to make proteins. Similarly, we have building block molecules for lipids and for carbohydrates. So we're going to do this one at a time, and I'm going to fill these in as we cover proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, nucleic acids. So that's on the way. This particular video is just for broad introduction. I do want to end with a little bit of help from my dog here. These, as I said, are familiar molecules. You eat these things all the time. You don't talk about the nutritional value of a nucleic acid because it's present in such small amounts in your food and your cells make it themselves. But these things, you got to have these in your diet. So what I did is I made a little bowl of food here for my dog just to do an illustration. So proteins, you need proteins, she needs proteins. So I got her a couple pieces of cooked chicken here. This chicken is mostly protein. There's a little bit of fat in there, but that is the vast majority of what I'm holding there is a piece of protein, and you can see that she thinks this is delicious, so she's going to get some protein in her diet. And proteins include things, or are useful in things like muscle. This is a piece of chicken muscle. This is chicken thigh. Her fur is made of protein. Your hair is made of protein. Your fingernails are made of protein. Lots of cellular parts are made of protein. The feathers on a bird, there's my chickens over there, her feathers are made of protein, etc. So got to have these in your diet, and there's some protein for my dog. Carbohydrates. Let's take carbohydrates next. Here's a piece of apple. There's a lot of water in there, but most of what's not water in there is carbohydrate. There's some sugar, which is what makes the apple sweet. That's a type of carbohydrate. And there's some fiber in there. Fiber is another type of carbohydrate. We're going to talk about complex versus simple carbohydrates. This has both, and she loves apples, so you can see she's dying to have a piece of carbohydrate in her diet as well. In fact, let's give her another one here. There you go. Okay. And then lipids. We got lipids on that list too. For lipid, I got a nice frozen beef marrow bone here. And yeah, that's a little bit of muscle out there, but that marrow inside that bone, that yellow marrow, is mostly fat. And as I said before, fats are a kind of lipid. We're going to talk about fats, or what a chemist would call fatty acids, talk about different kinds of dietary fats and so on. So when she chews on that bone, yeah, she's getting a little calcium out of the bone itself, but she's going to try to core that lipid out of there because apparently it's delicious, and she enjoys that, but it's also good, high quality calories for her as well. So I'm going to give her that bone chock full of lipid in the marrow cavity there, and she's going to work on that for a while. So there's an introduction to the molecules that we're going to be studying over the next 2.5 weeks or so, and we're going to have to carry that knowledge through the rest of biology because, you know, that's what cells are made of, is those things that we just listed. So look for more videos to give you more detail on each of those 4 kinds of molecules.